Good evening and welcome. And tonight on the line, I'm delighted to be talking to Matt Okuhara. But before we go to Matt, a little bit of admin. Of course, if you wish to ask a question, please put it in the Q&A box at the bottom, and we'll try and get through as many questions as possible. And always, we must give a big shout out to our funders, the Armed Forces Covenant Fund Trust. Matt, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So you've got a slightly unusual story here, I think, in your book, the idea about being a reservist. And I have to say, if people could see that, you looked awfully young, to be fair.
I was. So I joined the TA at 18, and when I deployed, I was 19 in a few days. I was very young. I had my 20th birthday actually in Iraq.
Okay. So you're in the TA, in the reserves. You were in for a year, give or take, before you were deployed. I'm guessing you also had a job as well before because obviously the reserves is just a part-time thing, isn't it?
That's right, yeah. So I was in for a year. So I joined in 2003. In February 2003 is when I joined. And my job at the time, my full-time job was I worked in retail banking. So I worked for a major bank at the time. So completely different to the infantry. You know, the most hostility you deal with in banking is someone who's getting frustrated about interest rates. Okay, but obviously on the other side of the coin, when you're an infantryman, you train to close and engage with the enemy. So it was the complete different thing. But yeah, so like Private Pike or Captain Mannering from Dad's Army, I worked in banking.
So a bit like the bank manager then.
Well, I wasn't the bank manager. I was because I was only 19 or 18, 19. I was quite junior in the bank, but it paid good. I mean, that's one of the reasons I joined the TA. I did consider a full-time career in the military because I'd always been interested in the military. Um, I looked at Royal Military Police was one thing I looked at because I was kind of interested in joining the police at the same time, and I looked at the intelligence corps as well. But the local TA unit was not too far commutable from where I lived, and banking paid a heck of a lot more than than the army did, either as a officer cadet, second lieutenant, or a private. It paid more, so I went the mercenary route, didn't I? So I
Mm.
joined the army to fulfill my military ambitions, but being a banker at heart, I guess. I went the route of the money, and I got into to banking and started my career in finance at the same time.
Okay. So were you aware on or around the time you joined the reserves of Iraq, what was going on, Op TELIC, or as a 19-year-old lad, was that just not on your radar?
No, it was totally on my radar. I mean, it's hard to avoid at that time. If you don't remember, in the early 2000s, it was all over the news, wasn't it? It was quite a surprise that the governments decided to go into Iraq because there was no UN mandate. Before the previous Gulf War, which was, was it 12 years before, that had a UN mandate, and everything that the British Army had done before then, whether it was in Bosnia or whatever, they had a UN mandate to go and do it, didn't they?
Mm.
This
Yep.
this didn't have one. Um, just followed the Americans in. So the news picked up on that quite quickly and then started to put it into the newspaper. And my newspaper of choice was the Daily Angry, the Daily Mail at the time. So they had a lot to say about it as well. So I was fully aware of the uh, George Bush and Tony Blair's intention to push into Iraq.
Mm. So without wanting to get too political, what were your views on the deployment, or the impending deployment? What were your thoughts on what was going on?
Well, my personal thoughts was it was a good thing. I didn't ever see myself being part of the war because I thought to myself, well, I'm just a reservist. That's none of my business particularly. But it seemed at the time to me as a 19-year-old who didn't know, we know better now. Okay, we know better now. But as a 19-year-old at the time, an 18-year-old and a 19-year-old, it seemed like a good idea. Saddam Hussein's a bad man. His sons are bad men. They do these terrible things. You had these sensationalist stories about the awfulness of their regime and how bad it's been for the Iraqis since the end of the first Gulf War. And he was the figurehead of this axis of evil that George W. Bush had defined. Uh, compared to Saddam Hussein, and you've got Osama bin Laden and Colonel Gaddafi, all these bad people who were making this axis of evil. And so it seemed like it was a just thing at the time. There were weapons of mass destruction. We know there weren't, but apparently there were, and there was torture, there were human rights abuses. He was not allowing weapons inspectors in. Um, so it looked like it was a justifiable, to me, a justifiable military deployment. So I was yeah, quite for it, really.
Okay. So you were in the reserves for about a year. How much training did you do? Because they're called weekend warriors, aren't they? I mean, so it couldn't have been a lot of training.
Yeah, they call us SWAT, don't they? Some weekends and Tuesdays. So we had I mean, for me, okay, so I joined in February 2003 and I was deployed in April 2004. Well, my pre-deployment training started in February 2004. So pretty much I had a full year as a recruit and then I went straight into um, pre-deployment training. Now, when I say I had a full year as a recruit, that was a full year as a TA recruit, a Territorial Army recruit. So in total, I had probably less than a month of military training under my belt, and that's being generous, rounding up and calling the Tuesdays I did at the Reserve Centre, the TA Centre, a whole day, which they, of course, they weren't. They were 2 hour evenings. Phase one training was supposed to be 5 weekends. Um, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, it was supposed to be. Now, anyone who's been in the reserves before, or still is in the reserves, or has a friend that maybe might know about it, Friday is not training day. That's arrive at the TA centre, get on the bus, and that'll take you to your training location for the weekend, and then you go to bed when you get there. So you're ready for Saturday. So that's not training day. Saturday, get up, have breakfast, then train all day. Sunday, get up, have breakfast, and you're finished by lunchtime because you got to get on the bus and go home and do your laundry before work starts on Monday. So, what they call a training weekend, ostensibly a training weekend, is actually a day and a half of training at most. So, my 5 weekends with 5 day and a halves starts making me up to, just over a week's worth of training to get me qualified as a soldier, 10 days or so. And then I had my combat infantryman's course, CIC, which is the you trade training. So obviously, once you finish phase one training, you do your trade training. I think it's different now. So I did 10 days at training at the combat infantryman's course in Catterick, but those 2 weeks was basically a 5 day a weekend and a 5 day. So that weekend in the middle was just um, relaxing, doing your laundry, and getting ready for the following week. So that was another 10 days. So 10 days plus 10 days, that's 20 plus a few Tuesday evenings. Ergo, less than a month's worth of training before I actually got called up. So yeah, some weekends and Tuesdays was my first year. In total, it made up about a month's worth of military activity.
Crikey. So how did you feel when you got your papers calling you up?
Oh, I can't use that word if we're live. It was a shock. I wasn't expecting to get called up, not at all. I had ambitions to start officer training. I wanted to be an officer. I was a private. Finished training. I thought, okay, now I've done that. Maybe I can move into get an interview with the EOC or go to a officer selection board. So when this piece of paper came, it had my name, and it said on because Queen was still on the throne, on Her Majesty's service. It said, okay, so maybe it's an invitation to an interview because I made a few noises to the right people who I thought were the right people that I wanted to be an officer. Anyway, open it up and it had my name, had my number. It says, report to the Reserve Training and Mobilization Center in Chilwell by the 2nd of November 2004 because you are going to Iraq, my son. And I thought, oof, right, I'm going to read that again. Went back upstairs to my room. I'm going to read that again. Read it again. Yeah, I'm going. Got on my phone, text a few of my friends who were in the TA with me, and kind of I didn't know whether it was just me who was going or whether a lot of us were going. So I just kind of sent this kind of touching on the subject. Oh, how are you today? You doing anything this weekend? Oh, by the way, I got this post. Did you ever? They come back and said, yeah, we've got selection, not selection, mobilization papers as well. Oh, and by the way, we're supposed to go to TA Centre this evening because 16 of us are going from Gloucester. I'm a Gloucester lad. 16 of us are going, and the company commander wants to speak to us today about the deployment. So it was a surprise. I think maybe the company knew it was coming because they'd arranged an informal briefing that weekend. So that's quite quick to get that done. So it was a surprise for me. Yeah, not it didn't take me long to get used to it, but I settled into the idea. I was going quite quickly within a couple of days. My biggest hang up, my biggest worry was how am I going to tell my mum that I've got to go to Iraq? I was living at home with my mum at the time, so I was like, how am I going to tell her this? That was my biggest concern. But, It was a surprise, yeah.
So what did she say?
Well, I didn't tell her.
She didn't know
So
you were
I,
going to
I couldn't
Iraq
figure
at
out what to
all.
say. No, well, I did in the end, but not until sort of like a long time before. Um, a long time before. She recently remarried, so I was living with my stepdad, who was my stepdad. And it was a real nice house we lived in. We like rural Gloucestershire. It wasn't like a townhouse or anything in the middle of the city where it was busy. It was like out in the countryside, cows, sheep farm. And that's sort of like a little piece of heaven, really, out there. And I thought, well, how am I going to tell them this? And if I wanted to ever go and visit my friends, I had to go back into the city. So one day I just said to her, "Oh, by the way, I'm going to Iraq. I'm going to see my friend now. Bye." So I just gave her the news and buggered off and let her process it her own way because I didn't know how to lay that on her because that's quite monumental news. I wish I could have done it the way the army told me I was going to Iraq. If I could just write her a letter and then just let let her digest it herself. But uh, I just told it to her and buggered off and went to see one of my mates.
So you obviously came back to home.
Yeah.
What did she say when you got back?
Nothing. She wasn't home. She'd gone to do something else. But my stepdad was home and we went to watch a game of football. The football team was called Forest Green Rovers. If anyone's a Forest Green Rovers fan, went out to watch them. They were nearby, and we had a brief chat about it and confirmed that yes, I was definitely going to Iraq, and it wasn't a wind up or anything. And well, that was it. There's nothing they could do about it. The law says if you're called up, you're called up. You can't, well, you can object to it, but most people are quite unsuccessful when it comes to uh, objecting that compulsory call out notice. So I
Yeah,
was going.
it's like the clues in the first word, isn't it?
Yeah. Compulsory, yeah.
Compulsory. So pre-deployment training, how did that go? Because it sounded like you probably needed a bit of training, having had a sort of TA 30 days worth of training.
Yeah, I didn't know anything. I was an awful soldier, but at that time I was still very bad. The only thing I was good at was fitness because I was young. So fitness was okay. Shooting, yeah, I could do that, but military discipline, uh, tactics, that sort of thing. I wasn't very good. I'd not had much practice in that, like I said, less than a month's worth. So we were attached to one PWRR, were our parent um, unit, and we were Salamanca Company, which was made up of reservists from the southwest. So Gloucester was the northernmost unit where I'm from, and then it went all the way down to sort of like Bodmin in Cornwall. So it was a southwestern infantry unit made up of the rifle volunteers. The Gloucesters, Devon and Dorsets and the light infantry, they're now known as the 6th Battalion, the Rifles. So the Rifles we're attached to one PWRR as a force protection company. So I'd been in for a year. So our pre-deployment training started on the 2nd of February 2004. The first 2 days were just getting kits issued to us, a battery of injections, a welfare check, making sure that your pay and admin's all sorted out. That was all done at Chilwell in Nottingham. And then we went straight to Tregantle Fort on the south coast, which is where we started. We formed up as a company and started our pre-deployment training there. And I got to say it was quite well done. It went from simple to complex. So as we started, I didn't know anyone, and probably a lot of people were in the same boat. Maybe we're unfamiliar with each other. Possibly one of the main differences of a reserve battalion and a full-time battalion is in a reserve battalion, you don't really know many people. You only know the people who are local, and maybe you meet them a weekend every now and then. Obviously, in a full-time battalion, you're working with each other all the time. So we started off this pre-deployment training just with a range and fitness package at Tregantle Fort, which is a week long. Um, and then we went into sort of the build-up training proper, which was at Wellsworthy Okehampton camp, which is on Dartmoor. Went to Longmoor, and we went to Hyde and Lydd down in Kent as well. So we went to a lot of different venues and practiced a lot of different skills on this build-up training. But like I said, it started off simple, went to complex. So whereas we start off with just fitness training and skill at arms, we finished off with public order training, you got the riot shields and the batons, petrol bomb training. We practiced deliberate contacts, engaging and withdrawing, first aid, medical training, driver training. So what started off was very simple. And me thinking, oh, this is all right. I can manage this. This is hard. Finished off a little bit, stretching my abilities as a 19-year-old. I had a driving license. Doesn't mean I knew how to drive though, you know. So given this Land Rover all of a sudden, which didn't have power steering, I'd never driven anything without power steering before. So because I had to adapt and come completely out of my comfort zone to bring myself up to the level of, I would say, the vast majority of Salamanca Company who were more experienced and more mature than I was.
So, how did you feel about when you got your date and you knew when you were obviously being deployed? Were you excited, nervous, anxious? How would you describe your emotional state at that time?
My thing was I was not like I said I thought the Iraq conflict was justifiable and I still felt that at the time, so that never even entered my mind. My biggest hang up was I wanted to do well because of the people I was with. I wanted to do well for them. Um, I didn't want to let anyone down. I was kind of self-conscious in that respect. Yeah, I still am quite a self-conscious guy. I very inward looking. So I didn't want to let anyone down when I was in the training. So I tried as hard as I could, and then I wanted to replicate that out in Iraq. I didn't know how well I would perform. Doing something in training is completely doing different to doing something operationally. And so, yeah, I was nervous, but I wasn't nervous because I thought I might get hurt. I wasn't nervous because I thought I was going to a conflict zone. I was nervous because didn't want to let anyone down. So I was nervous about sort of my introspection more about than I was about the conflict itself.
Hmm. So, what role were you assigned once you got to Iraq? What was your job?
Individually or as a company?
Let's start with the company, and then we'll talk about
Yeah.
individual.
Well, Salamanca Company was assigned force protection. And right, this is how new I was when I was a soldier. I didn't know what that word meant. So when we went to our company briefing, we'd just been formed up, and this guy, Major Evans from the was he light? Yeah, from the light infantry. He said, "Okay, so we're going to be the force protection company." I didn't know what that was. So I had to say to a corporal that I knew quite well, "Yeah, what's the force protection company?" No one ever told me. Like I said, my training had been less than a month. That hadn't covered force protection. Oh, you're going to guard things. We're going to guard things. And I thought, oh, cool. Yeah, that's fine. That'll be safe. Barricades and, a fortress and, lots of reinforcements if something goes wrong. Yeah, that seems like a good deployment. So that's what we were assigned to do. Force protection at Basra Palace in Basra City, which was the host location of what was called the Coalition Provisional Authority, the CPA. Now, the CPA was in place to act like an interim county council or city council for uh, various parts of Iraq at the time. The invasion had happened, which meant that the infrastructure, the government infrastructure, had been dismantled. There was no military, no police, no fire service, no sanitation, no medical provisions. That was all gone. So it was being handled by the Coalition Provisional Authority. Um, they were hiring either local contractors or providing the service themselves with military personnel from the coalition. We were assigned to protect their compound, which was Basra Palace, quite a large compound. Um, Once they left, which was 2 months after, we arrived in April, May, June. June they finished. We went from being a force protection company to a line infantry company with an air of responsibility. So we're still based at Basra Palace, and we had to be self-sufficient in that respect, as in protecting our own location. But we also had to go out and start patrolling at the time, which was completely at odds to a lot of the training that we'd done. Our training had been very security focused. Once we started patrolling, this was a complete sort of like different skill set what we trained for. We were actually doing uh, soft patrolling a lot of the time, but also some aggressive patrolling to try and dominate the area. As the threat level rose in the city, in the country, we had to put on a more aggressive patrolling routine. So Salamanca's company role evolved over the 6 months from being a simple force protection and security company to an aggressively patrolling unit with an air of operations.
And all of that is in response to what's going on the ground, basically.
Well, yeah, like I said, the Coalition Provisional Authority left, and that was an opportunity really for the insurgents to take advantage of the situation. The reason the Coalition Provisional Authority left was because local elections had been held, and so you didn't need the Provisional Authority. Well, there was actually an authority, a council with a mayor in Iraq. Okay, so who were the candidates likely to be? Well, there was the candidates that the Coalition Provisional Authority wanted to come in, people who were more receptive to foreign influence, but there was also the fundamentalist candidates as well. And in order for them to win support, they used to uh, damage the infrastructure and say, look, well, look what happens when we're not in charge. You don't get water, you don't get medical provisions. If we're in charge, the coalition, the allies, the invaders, they can't provide anything safely. Look what's happening. So whilst they were trying to get their people into position, they were also stirring the pot as well, just making it a very, very difficult place to operate for us and a very, very difficult place for the local people to live.
Mm.
So that was the the situation we were patrolling into. It was getting worse and worse.
Okay. So coming back to what you alluded to earlier, what was your role within the company or within your platoon?
Well, I was three platoon, and when we say platoon, it was only a half-size platoon. So we had five half platoons. We had one platoon, two platoon, and three platoon. One and two platoon were made up of two halves. One commanded by a lieutenant, one commanded by a sergeant. Two platoon was the same, a lieutenant and a sergeant, but three platoon was only a lieutenant. We had no sergeant, so we were half-size platoon of 15 guys and an officer, 16 in total. My role in three platoon was I was the although I was an infantryman, the same as everyone else when they had been, I was the platoon medic. What had happened was I hurt my knee jumping over a wall in Hyde and Lyd, which is in Kent. I jumped over a wall and I twisted my knee, not badly, but badly enough that it was a little bit swollen and a bit discoloration. So I needed a week off of hard physical training. Coincidentally, at that time, though, the message had gone out that the OPTAG, the Operational Training and Advisory Group, they were going to start running a medics course for various units in that were due to go deploy on TELIC for the TELIC that we were going to, for medics. They wanted to run this medics course, which was not a physical course. It was more of a thinking and practical skills classroom-based course. So that gave me 5 days off my leg to recover. So even though I would have volunteered for it anyway, I was kind of said, well, you've got to go and do this because you need to rest your leg. So I did this. When I say I was a medic, I wasn't really a medic. I was an infantry soldier with 5 days additional training in medical treatment. But once I came back from that training, I was given a very rudimentary first aid kit and assigned as the the platoon medic.
So when you say rudimentary, before we came on air, you were talking about the fact you made some purchases in the UK, I presume, before you were deployed. Is that right?
Yeah, the first aid kit was mostly stuff I'd bought privately from a camping shop. So what I bought was, you can if you can buy sort of quite large red bags with a white Swiss cross on it, can't you? That says
Yeah.
wilderness sort of like first aid kit. That's what I bought. Because the first aid kit I was given was mostly first field dressing, blood sponges, bandages, basically. I'd been given a bag of saline fluid with a line and a needle. No one had shown me how to use that, so I don't know how I was given it, but I was given it. But I supplemented this kit with, tube grit paracetamol, deep heat, wilderness first aid kit. I didn't have any tourniquets, so I went to Halfords, bought some bungees to use as tourniquets, and that was the first aid kit that I carried for the 6 months. It was mostly a mishmash of things that I'd bought privately, as well as some first field dressings that the army had given me. We were pretty under-resourced in that respect.
Mm. So can you give me a sense of what Basra was like? Because you said you've come from a very rural part of Gloucestershire. You're
Mm.
now in Iraq, in Basra. What was it like? Give us a sort of, give us a sense of the place.
Okay, well, so yeah, I come from rural Gloucestershire, so really, really nice, green and pleasant lands, you know, um, cattle, not many cars, nice and quiet. Basra, on the other hand, okay, very, very different. So we arrived into Iraq. We arrived at Basra International Airport, which was in the hands of the Royal Air Force at the time, and we got on some coaches. And we went to a build-up area called Shaiba Logistics Base, and that was in the middle of the desert. So if you've ever seen a typical Iraq film, maybe like Jarhead or Bravo 20 with Andy McNabb or something. It looked very similar to that. We are just a base in the middle of nowhere where we did a week's worth of acclimatization. And that's my first thing. Okay, it's a big flat expanse, oil derricks on the horizon with the fire burning out as they bleed off the excess gas. And I thought, oh, it's just like in the movies. A week after we went into the city proper, right? The first thing that got to me was the smell. It was very, very smelly. There was a lot of open sewers, um, dead animals, animal feces. It was like driving through a wall of smell. Basically, we had to go over this lo long humpback bridge, similar to like you might see in going over the fjords in Scandinavia. Long humpback bridge to get into the city, and we went over that, and the smell just hit me because I was on top cover on this vehicle. I was standing out the back with my individual weapon, keeping a lookout. Smell, poof. The heat was particularly noticeable inside the city. There was this kind of microwave effect. There was a lot of tall buildings, so the heat came in. It wasn't able to escape, so it bounced off. Regularly, we had temperatures above 50 degrees inside the city, so it was very, very hot. Very, very sunny, very, very noticeably smelly, and quite hostile as well. The area of operations we had two distinct profiles. There was the semi-rural green sector, which was quite a good place to patrol. I didn't mind going on patrol in the green sector, but inside the city itself was the pink and the yellow sector. Um, Noticeably a different characteristic inside there. Some people would wave and say salam alaikum, they would say good morning or whatever, and other people would just stare at you or make gestures towards you. Um, Noticeably a tense atmosphere inside the city itself. And my reason for thinking that it was probably like that is the people who lived rurally, they were quite self-sufficient. They used to live on farms, and the farm hands used to live in small barracks or block houses with that family. They used to have their own food, they used to have their own water supply, probably quite self-sufficient, could look after themselves. They didn't need the Coalition Provisional Authority. Inside the city, like I said, open sewage, no medical provisions. No, you wanted water, you had to find it from somewhere, and it was all filthy water. You could get it out of the river, but the Shatt al Arab, which is the river, one of the large tributaries that fed the Euphrates, wasn't a clean river. So the two areas were very, very different. One was very tense, and one was a bit more accommodating, I would say.
So when you were when obviously the sort of, should we say, the mood changed and you were actually actively patrolling and sometimes aggressively, can you give me a
Mm.
sense of what those encounters were like?
Well, I can give you an example. We had to do a patrol, three platoon, where the company had assigned duties. So whilst one platoon or one half platoon would be assigned day patrols, one would be on night patrols, one would be on guard duty, one would be on gate duty, one would be on quick reaction force. So there's different tasks. At one point, we were assigned to night patrols. We were on night patrols. Three platoons on night patrol, and we had to go and meet up with some Iraqi police. They wanted to go and lift someone who was conducting hostile reconnaissance on a medical facility near to where it was only a kilometer or so away from where we were based. So it was within our area of operations. So the major had assigned us as the night patrol unit to go and assist the Iraqi police. There were supposed to be four police officers, three of them turned up, one of them didn't. Good idea because it was a pretty dangerous situation. And of course, going to look for someone to arrest them. Um, we weren't going to make the arrest, the Iraqi police were going to do it. And what struck me was the Iraqi police. They had blue shirts on. That was the only item uniform they really had. One was carrying an AK-47, two had Marikov pistols, which is old Russian sort of 9mm. They didn't have any handcuffs or notebooks or anything like that. So when they made the arrest, I had no idea how they're going to make the arrest or whether they're going to summarily execute whoever they found, because that's looked like what they were tooled up for. They got told, we were told that the person they were looking for was an individual of Arabic description, so that's just like everyone, and they would be driving a white Toyota pickup truck, which is just pretty much everyone. So every car that wasn't a taxi was basically a white Toyota pickup. So the cops had to stop every white Toyota pickup truck that came through this area. The problem being they didn't have torches either, and it was nighttime. So every time they had to stop a car, they had to do it underneath a street light, and not all of them worked. So they were very, very visible. So we had to provide protection for these guys whilst they were doing their checks of these vehicles. So you think, oh, that's not too aggressive. Well, it turned very aggressive very quickly because what happened was that they were spotted doing whatever it is they were doing, and they came under attack, which means we came under attack at the same time. So we had to start returning fire. So the tenseness in the atmosphere, you could almost feel like something was about to happen because there were always these pre-contact indicators that something was going to happen. For all of a sudden, there'd be a lot less traffic or a lot less people. They knew something was going to happen, and they just you got this sort of like not a sixth sense, but you started to notice things that would indicate that the environment was subtly changing and you were preparing for something to happen. And that was the first time it happened. And the more contacts we went into and the more patrols we did, the easier it was to actually identify. There's a certain je ne sais quoi about it. It was hard to define, but you could feel a change in the atmosphere when we were doing our patrols, that something was about to happen, or there was a high likelihood that something would, because the area was quite tense or difficult to operate in.
Did you always patrol with the Iraqi police, or were there other kind of orders given?
We we sometimes patrol with the Iraqi police. So there were two, well, there were three police forces. We patrolled with two of them. There was the river police. We didn't patrol with them. That was the Navy's job. And you may remember this Navy and Marines, they got picked up in Iran. They crossed the Satalara River, which is the
Yeah.
natural border. So the Navy, they patrolled with the water police, the river police. We didn't do that. We patrolled with either the city police, who wore the blue shirts, or the traffic police, who wore white shirts. The traffic police, they tended to operate at night time only, maintaining curfews on roads. That was their role. So if we were on night patrol, sometimes we'd work with them. Sometimes we'd patrol with the Iraqi police, but it was only when requested. Um, the vast majority of our patrols were GDA patrols, or ground defensive area patrols. We're just looking to dominate the area of our operations, to say, look, this is our patch. We know what's going on here. We know how to patrol. If you come into our area, then we will notice and we'll do something about it. So we didn't patrol with them all the time. I would say 10% of the time we patrolled with the cops. 90% of the time it was either a GDA patrol, a standing patrol, or something. We did a lot of work on the border, the Iran-Iraq border as well. So we would normally be doing those sorts of patrols instead.
Okay. Did you put any of your medic training to use?
Yeah, like I said, when these Iraqi policemen, they came under fire. Perceptual distortion here. I don't know how or when they came under fire. I just knew they were under fire. So there was either a gunshot or a burst of fire, and one of the policemen, he fell away from the vehicle he was leaning into, just checking, and boom, 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 he fell backwards. And I was running towards where this shooting had come from, following the lieutenant, and he turned around and pointed to this Iraqi policeman who was lying on the floor. Yeah, because obviously he'd been injured. So at the same time as running, I was getting my equipment off of my back, because that's what my first aid kit was. And I got to this Iraqi policeman, and he'd been shot. So I did a primary survey, so what they call, you look from where the injury was. It was quite obvious where the injury was. He'd been shot in the shoulder. Now it was a real bad shot. It was either a burst of fire or very, very close. So what I'd done, this gunshot had disintegrated, basically. You know how the shoulder is like a ball and socket? It just
Yeah.
disintegrated the ball part. So his arm was just being held on by the tendons where the armpit is. So as he was rolling around in a lot of pain, and obviously his arm was just sort of like this lifeless lump that was sort of like dragging along with him. So obvious where he'd been shot. Now I'd done a week's worth of training, right? So I was the right guy for this job, wasn't I? This guy was basically bleeding to death without an arm. I'd done a week's worth of training, and one of those days was how to deal with bleeding, right? That's not enough. You need a full A&E suite or a full surgery to deal with that. This guy's arm is gone. So I tried to stop the bleeding. How do you stop this? I put a bandage on. It was like putting a sponge. When you clean your car, you put your sponge in the bucket of water, and the sponge gets wet straight away, doesn't it? It was like that. I put this first field dressing on. The blood just came through. I could feel it pumping through the bandage in between my fingers, and I thought, well, I did. So I stuck another bandage on. Right? No time at all. That one was soaked as well. How am I going to stop this bleeding? Oh, I know. I'll put a tourniquet on. I wasn't thinking straight. You can't tourniquet up on the shoulder because there's nothing to grip onto. But I used one of these Halfords bungees that I bought. The same kind of thing you use just to hold your luggage down on the back seat of your car. So I turned that into a sort of a noose, fed it up over the pretty much bisected arm, and thought, oh, I can tourniquet this. There's no purchase up there. So I just left the thing on. However, because we were very, very close to a hospital, some of the hospital security guards ran out and grabbed this guy and dragged him back in. So he had some first field dressings on his shoulder, or what was left of it, as he got dragged. Still was alive when he got dragged in. So that was the first time I'd used my uh, training. The second time I used my first day training was about a minute after, because as I ran forward to rejoin the rest of the platoon, I tripped over another Iraqi policeman who was lying on his front this time. I thought, okay, what's the matter with this guy? Is he playing possum or what? So I turned him over, and he was obviously out, he was out stone cold, or even doing a good job of pretending it. So I dragged him backwards towards the hospital where those security guards were. And as I dragged, there was some gunfire that came overhead, made me fall over in surprise and startle. I pulled this guy basically over me as I fell. The momentum carried him over me. And as I looked down his body, I could see that his white trainer had turned red, leg injury. So I thought, okay, primary survey again. So I went to try and do a primary survey on this guy to try and see where the injury was. Like, I didn't need to get much further than that because those same security guards came out and grabbed him and rammed me back in there. But they picked me up at the same time, so like pushed me away. So get away from us because I was drawing fire towards them. The bullets kept coming towards. They pushed me back towards the contact. So yeah, I had used my first day training uh, in a baptism of fire. Within that 20 minute contact lasted about 20 minutes. I had to, be the medic twice. But there were other times when I had to use medic training for less serious things, like one of our guys got his thumb trapped in a door of an armored car, and he started forming a blood blister under his nail. So I had to lance the blood blister under his nail. Someone fell over and it ended with a bit of glass stuck in their broken glass stuck in their hand. The choice was with those sorts of injuries, go to the Royal Army Medical Corps. They've changed their name now, haven't they? The Royal Army Medical Corps to something else. I can't remember. But you had to go to the IMC detachment and get it treated, which would normally mean you'd be signed off of duty or given light duties for 1 or 2 days, which no one wanted to do, or come and see Matt, and he'll probably have something in his first day get to deal with it. So there was either dealing with very, very serious things or dealing with very, very trivial things, nothing in between.
I guess at least you put it to use.
I did put it to use, yeah. Made me feel important.
So, how long were you out there for? 4 months, did you
Yeah,
say?
six months or just over 6 months. Yes, we arrived on the 16th of April and we left on the 28th of October.
Okay. So what was it like coming back home when, having had a very different experience, being obviously very young, and then you're coming back to a leafy Gloucestershire, I guess. What was that
I,
sort of transition back
I,
like?
I couldn't sleep because the sound of the cows in the field kept me awake. So every time I tried to sleep, I always woke up early. Because I woke up the same time the cows did, and I was tired and I needed to sleep, but I couldn't because I wasn't used to the noise. What I was used to was the noise of an army base, our lines, the constant hustle and bustle of what's it to be like. Our accommodation block was right next to a vehicle pool, and in that vehicle pool, that's where they kept the Warrior IFVs, the large armored vehicles, and they were going through maintenance constantly, day or night, starting up the engines, changing panels, and track bashing and those sorts of things. I was used to that noise. I could sleep through that easily, no problem. Back in Gloucestershire, no, it actually was peaceful and quiet again. I just wasn't used to that transition, and we never had any post-tour sort of decompression. We finished literally on the 28th of October, and before Halloween, I was back in my bed. We didn't have anything to uh, any time to relax or get over it. We just demobilized very, very quickly and sent home.
That
So
must have been quite a surreal experience, was it not? Or was that just my interpretation of it? Sort
yeah,
of
we
knowing that
probably
you're on the.
it was surreal. I mean, I didn't know we were supposed to have. Well, we weren't supposed to have, but most units had some sort of decompression afterwards, like a week in Cyprus or something laid on for them. We were just sort of thanks for that, and we were sent back home. Um, so I guess it was quite surreal, but I was glad to be back home. It, you know, I was excited to arrive in Iraq. Part of something big, the biggest thing I'd ever done. I was 19. Now, the biggest thing I'd done before that was I was part of the school's music department. I was a guitarist, bass player, that sort of thing. The biggest thing I'd done was a music tour in Europe. But that was all chaperoned by the older students and the teachers, of course. So I was doing something big on my own for the first time ever. So I was excited to go. Of course, not long after arriving, maybe 2 or 3 days after arriving, I was like, I can't wait to go home. So eventually I did get home, and I was happy that it wasn't being extended perhaps by a few extra days of decompression or something. I was back in my own bed, eating the things I wanted to eat, watching the TV, listening to the music I wanted to listen to. So it was nice to be back, but it did take some time to relax and adjust.
Hmm. So did you stay in the reserves?
I did stay in the reserves kind of. I didn't stay in the infantry. I stayed in the infantry for a little bit longer. So what is that? I stayed maybe for another less than a year. But the PACER, which is the Permanent Staff Administrative Officer, he's the sort of well, or she, but in our case, a he, is the officer that sort of like runs the unit full time on behalf of the major, who's normally a reservist. He managed to, because I'd made noises about wanting to do officer training before leaving. Now because I was still young, he managed to get me into UOTC, which is University Officer Training Corps unit, which was nearby where I lived in Bristol. So he managed to get me into there, which is essentially, for all intents and purposes, it's a reservist unit. It's just a non-deployable reservist unit. So he managed to get me into there. So I entered a UOTC as an under officer and went on to get what's known as a Type B commission or a non-deployable commission or administrative only commission with 43 Wessex Brigade, 43 Wessex Brigade. During that time, I was in the Gloucesters. The unit had become the Rifles, so I was commissioned into the Rifles as a second lieutenant on a Type B commission. After that, because I couldn't stay at university because I was not a student there, I was just a member of the UOTC through whatever the PACO had managed to arrange. I went on to become a cadet, a CCF, not an ACF, a combined cadet force at a private school instructor. So I joined a private school as an instructor for a few years. I was still in banking at the time, but then my career changed. I joined the police, and when I was in the police, there was no time for reservist activity anymore, so it came to an end.
So how long were you in the police?
I did 11 years in the police. 11.
Okay. So I think it's probably, I should have mentioned this at the beginning, but you're currently in Japan, aren't you? So
Currently in Japan.
you said to me it's 3 o'clock in the morning, or it was when we first started this call.
Yeah, it's
Um,
4:40 now.
and you're currently a martial artist.
I am. I've got I work for a martial arts display team called the Matsumoto Castle Gun Corps, or in Japanese, the Matsumoto Jyotepotai. So I work for the Matsumoto Castle Gun Corps. People don't often associate guns with the samurai. They use them, don't bring a sword to a gunfight. The samurai were sensible enough to know that. So they did have these kind of specific kind of guns that the Japanese use called Tanegashima, but more accurately known as Hinawaju. The Matsumoto Castle Gun Corps is a gunnery display team, and I joined them as an interpreter, not as a performer. But I have now I've been in the Japan for quite some time and got my gun license and such. For example, I'm a interpreter and a performer for this martial arts display team. And so what we do is we go around the country doing martial arts displays because we're one of the few teams in Japan that have guns. But also when there's things like you've seen that television show Shogun, for example.
Yeah.
Well, where do you think they get the extras who know how to use guns? So we do stuff for the media as well because it's quite easy. Obviously, I'm obviously very, very Caucasian, but once you've got a helmet and mask and all that sort of stuff on, you look the same as anyone else. So we do displays and we do media requests as well. And I'm the go-between for when they struggle with English to Japanese translations.
Okay. I've got another question for you, but I just want to remind everybody in the audience, if you do have a question for Matt, please put it into the Q&A and I'll pop that question to him. So Matt, what made you decide to write the book?
Yeah, well, I'm a big reader. A bigger reader now that I'm out in Japan. I've got more time to do it, but I enjoyed reading as when I was in England as well. And I'd not really read any military books. My favorite genre of book being narrative nonfiction, military narrative nonfiction. So Bravo 20, for example, was a favorite of mine. Not so much now. I've read it too many times. Um, but Bravo 20, Special Forces, the one that got away, that's Special Forces, isn't it? You've got these new Special Forces books from people like Ant Middleton, it's all Special Forces. So really, you've got two categories of military memoir that have in abundance. You've got the heroic stuff, and you've got the trauma stuff. And there's nothing really that fit what the reservists do and what the general PBI or the general army did, um, other than some anecdotes inside those two categories of book which I just mentioned. So I wanted to write something that reflected my experience, well, not just my experience, but the experience of what it was like to be an infantryman. Now, the subtitle I've given my book is um, the memoir of an unlikely infantryman in Iraq, because I was a very unlikely infantryman. I've been vegetarian since I was 8 years old, so constant piss taking there. You don't get vegetarians in the army, especially not in the infantry. Um, I'm quite high strung, so I get upset easily. That's not very infantry like. I'm a bit of a chatterbox. I come from a semi-affluent background, so I was a very, very unlikely person to be in the infantry. So not only did I want to sort of uh, look at the common man's experience, I also wanted to put into it the kind of absurdity of the situation that I found myself in because I was completely at odds with the system that I'd chosen to join. So that's what I've tried to do with that book. I've tried to make people see it from not just from my point of view, but from the general point of view, how absurd a military deployment can be, particularly when you're not expecting it or when you're not the right person to be there, perhaps.
Well, you obviously did your job properly. So, I think you've obviously done your service, and I think that's important to recognize. Um, on the subject of reservists, I just think it's worth mentioning just how big a role reservists played during Iraq and Afghanistan, and probably increasingly so in the coming years, the way things are going at the moment. So, would you just like to touch on that? Just because it's not just a handful of people that were deployed from the reserves, is it?
Well, in Iraq, it was 20% of the force was made up of reservists. So that's a 1 in 5, isn't it? We were the first unit to since the Suez Crisis. Well, the Suez Crisis was 1954, wasn't it? Was it 1953?
Something
Something
like
like
that. Yeah, yeah.
that. Between then and TELIC, Op TELIC, a formed unit of reservists had never been deployed. It had either been like individuals for backfill or volunteers being attached to regular units. This was the first time in a long time that the um, reservists have been deployed as a whole, as a unit in a ground holding role. So that was a government sort of a policy experiment to see whether it was something that could happen. And obviously it was successful. It happened more and more now. But during that era, the British military was so overstretched with its commitments in um, Iraq and Afghanistan, and also other places, because obviously it still had garrison duties in places like Germany and still the wind down from Northern Ireland, stretched thin. So 20% of the force was made up of people like me, the stabs, the stupid TA bastards, or the SWAT some weekends and Tuesdays guys. They were made up of reservists, regular and reserves as well. People who just recently left and come back into the system. We had a few of them in our company. They were left the military full time and come back in quite quickly. But yeah, a lot of the troops were reservists.
So when you say one in five, did you say
About
20%?
one in, it was 20%, yeah, 1 in 5.
Something like 125,000 people deployed to Iraq, something like that.
Yeah, at the peak, yeah,
Yeah.
so it's a peak. The vast majority. I don't know if the British Army can manage that many now on a deployment, but the vast majority of the British Army was doing something at that time.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. We have a few questions coming in, so that's good. We've obviously woken them up. Um, Matt, Ron says, Matt, what an interesting chap, and why no pictures of you aged 19? Look, Ron, if you have a close up of this, look at that fresh
Yeah,
face. That's a
that's
very
me,
young
19
man,
years
isn't it?
old.
That is a very young man. Um, but boy, and he goes on to say, we ribbed about your boyish looks, and he thanks you for your service as well.
Was I ribbed? Absolutely. So the common thing they said was, "Does your mum know you're here?" Because I did look young. I didn't even need to shave. Put it that way. Most of the lads, they needed to wake up in the morning before patrol or before the evening patrol and have a fresh shave. I could do it basically lying in my pit, just use a simple cheap electric razor that would get rid of this bum fluff off of my face before I woke up. So that was an advantage of being young, was I didn't need to shave particularly often. But yeah, I was young. Does your mum know you're here was the biggest mistake I got. And yeah, she did know I was here because I did, like I said at the start of this interview, I did have the guts to say to her just before buggering off to see my mate in town. I said, "Oh, by the way, I'm going to Iraq." So yeah, she did know.
And he says, say thanks for your service, and best of luck in Japan. I think obviously you've been there for 10 years, haven't you? So
Yeah.
then he says Yokuyata. That might mean something to you. Does that mean anything to you?
Yokoyata, Shiranakata, I don't know. Yokoyata, ne, Yokoyata. I've not heard that before. Maybe if it was maybe if I saw it written down, maybe I'd understand it. But
Well,
yeah,
that's probably also my pronunciation, but not to worry.
okay.
Francis says, thank you, Matt, for a really entertaining and frank talk. Look forward to reading the book. If it's not a rude question, can I ask about your surname?
Okuhara,
Hmm.
yeah. So that's in Japan. There's a law. If you're married, you have to have the same surname. So I had to take my wife's surname when I came to Japan. I didn't have to. She could have taken mine, but mine's a British surname. Japanese people have difficulty pronouncing it because there's a V in the name, and they can't say that it's a V. So instead of saying, for example, violin, they say violin. The V is very difficult to pronounce. So instead of taking my surname, which was Gavin, I took my wife's surname, which was Okuhara, much easier for them to pronounce. So then when I do speak to people or go to meetings or whatever, they can call me Okuhara-san instead of struggling with calling me a British name. It's just practicality more than anything else.
Well, I sure you got some brownie points. A bit romantic taking your wife's name, I think.
Well, yeah, that's there is
You
that.
get points for that, I think. You should get points
Yeah.
for that. Grant says, so that the army could improve their pre-deployment training, did you ever have any lessons learned sessions back at your original unit? So was it the learning from Iraq, did it translate back into your unit?
Yeah, it definitely did. The reserves as a whole learned a lot because of the deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan. Like I said, when I joined, I did 5 weekends basic training and 2 weeks, and that's a lot more robust now. I've a friend who's in the yeomanry, the reserve tanks, and he's just finished his training, and he did considerably a lot more training than I did, and he's in Estonia at the moment, assisting with that operation in response to the potential threat from Russia. And his what he's doing up there is essentially pre-deployment training along the border as sort of like a deterrent force, and what they're doing, and they're their reservists is not reservist training. They're just completely integrated completely into the full-time military. So I think a lot of lessons were learnt where the reservists are, especially because the Army 2020 project, which came to an end 5 years ago when the restructuring went on, it became one army as opposed to the Territorial Army and the British Army. It
Hmm.
just became the army. A lot of lessons were learned structurally and strategically. And so the reservists, I think, now have a lot more robust training package. Because I think as well, the government are going to rely on reservists a lot more in the future anyway.
Yeah.
I think that's going to be the the structure of the army going forwards.
And essential, I think. Grant also goes on to ask, after your return, did you have any feelings of guilt or doubt over your experiences in Iraq?
Yeah, I was I did eventually. It caught up with me. I didn't have it straight away. When I got back from Iraq, I was just happy to be home, happy to be in one piece. But it did bother me to some extent that I was trained as a medic and that I wasn't actually able to, because I did say I passed off these people alive to the hospital, and they both died. They both bled to death, and it wasn't my fault, but I did feel like it was my fault.
Mm.
I didn't shoot them, and I got them to the hospital alive, but it did play on me for a while. So I did have a lot of survivor's guilt, or maybe a bit of late stage. I like I said to you, it kind of boiled over just a little bit there when I said I felt like I was the wrong person for the job. I did feel that quite genuinely, like I shouldn't have been there. There should have been someone better doing the job, someone more mature, capable, perhaps. So it came to me a few years after I'd managed to
Mm.
get back from Iraq. I did boil over a little bit afterwards. Yeah.
You okay with it now?
I'm okay with it now, yeah. So,
Good.
but then it was quite tough. It was a quite tough period. It came out of the blue as well. It wasn't like it built up over time. It just happened all of a sudden.
Mm.
Bad dreams, bad memories, those sorts of things. But okay now though, yeah.
That's quite common what you're saying there in terms of it coming out the blue. It has to be just like can be the least, you know, unexpected time and the least insignificant trigger as well, or reminder, or whatever it
No,
might be,
yeah,
things
yeah,
that you
yeah.
just wouldn't necessarily be aware of. But I'm glad to hear that you're dealing with it now. Sean says, good drills, Matt. Any view on Japan's new focus on defense?
Yeah, it's good, isn't it? I've got a lot of friends in the self-defense force, the Zhetai. In fact, I'm writing a book about the Zhetai now, this Japanese self-defense force, because at the same time they were the British Army in Iraq, the um, Zhetai were on their first ever foreign deployment since the Second World War in Samahwa, which is in Iraq at the same southern Iraq as well. So I've got some friends who I know through my shooting activities who are um, former um, members of the Japanese Self-Defense Force. They don't have an army, it's called a Self-Defense Force. But because of that, I'm actually writing my next book now, which is called Not a Soldier. And that's based on the Iraqi not the Iraqi, the Japanese Self-Defense Force, and their renewed focus on defense in the country. That's come out in the news now. It actually happened years ago when Abe-san was still the prime minister. So the build-up started a long time ago. It's only just really been picked up by the sort of foreign media, by the British and Western media that that's happened. The first thing that happened was they created a Marines regiment, which they'd never had before. And that happened under Abe about 8 years ago. It's been progressing, but it's a lot more visible now because the army is being a lot better funded and
Mm.
uh, a lot more visible in the world sphere, particularly with the threat from China that we face here and the threat from Russia as well. We have a Russian threat right in the north as well. So Japan is looking to address those threats, big buildup of resources because of it.
Sean also asks, do you stay in touch with the Salamanca gang? I think I don't know if you know Sean actually.
Yeah. Well, we do. We call ourselves Salawancas. So the Salamanca Company. So we got our Salamanca group. There's about 60 of us on Facebook. So the company was about 86 strong. Unfortunately, a few of them have died since. One got killed in Afghan, one died of complications because of Iraq. So, but their next of kin, their nearest and dearest, are also part of the group. So not only do we stay in touch with the people who were there, we stay in touch with the significant others of the Salawancas as well.
That's good to hear. Well done. Grant also asked, did you get any help with the challenges, your feelings and your challenges you felt when you said it hit you a couple of years after you returned? Did you get any help?
Yeah, eventually it took a long time though. I was self-aware enough to know that I needed to get some support or some sort of help. I did go to the GP, and the GP, sort of did some referrals. However, it took about 18 months before the MOD started to get involved, despite persistent asking. So it was a very, very slow mechanism, but I did get some help. But 18 months, 2 years living with those sorts of feelings whilst trying to balance a domestic life career at the same time, it was quite tough.
Mm.
One of the catalysts for moving to Japan, for that matter, was just to get out of that environment and to move to somewhere where I feel a bit more at home. I like the Japanese lifestyle, the way of Japanese living, very different to England, and I knew a lot about it anyway because I'd been studying Japanese, visiting Japan, dating Japanese women for a long, long time. So I did get the help eventually. It was just very, very slow in coming, and that kind of made me think, oh, well, this is, if this happens again, I'd rather be somewhere else if it happens, and so I chose Japan.
Wow. So that just leaves me to say, Matt, thank you so much for that. You've called yourself a chatterbox. I'm so glad that you are because it's been a very, very interesting talk, and I really appreciate you taking the time. I'm going to say coming all the way from Japan, but we're really talking about the 3 o'clock start, aren't we? In the morning.
It was three, yes, quite at least. It's five now.
It's 5 now. Okay, well, that's better.
Back
Um,
to bed.
Back to bed. Yeah, very wise. Again, thank you so much for that. I really appreciate it.